I mean, just taking a look at the responses which you gave, you understood that. Many of you were completely disarmed and honest and candid, and I really, really appreciated your responses. So what I want to do today is follow up on that, and I don't know how long it's going to take us, but I don't care how long it takes us because I think this is one of the most important things we've done. So we're going to camp out here for a little bit and talk through this whole thing and do our best not to leave you with nice cliches that don't give you direction. So with that, I want to have a class discussion where you guys don't talk verbally, but you do through this, okay? Because I think if you just kind of listen to each other talk through this, through what you've said, it will be really, really enlightening and helpful, and we will cover this in a way that we should. So I'm not going to read any names. I'm not going to give you any details, but I just think I want to give you some of the benefit that I got from reading through this stuff, and I hope it's not going to be boring to you because it wasn't to me. I just couldn't stop reading through all of them. They were so good. So part of what I've done, I can't read through all of them, but what I've done is I've picked out some that are kind of representative of others. So if you recognize your words here, you are most likely not alone. You represent a lot of other people's thoughts as well. And a lot of people said things like this. I don't have this figured out. I can't figure out what to do with all this. I'm not quite sure where to go. I am humbled and I am troubled, but I'm not sure what to do. Right? So don't feel bad if you felt that way. Here's a good summary. Someone says, I think I mistook personality and temperament traits as the qualities listed in Galatians 5. And there were a lot of people who mentioned that. Under this misdirection, it was easy to sort through the list and pick out things I was good at and the things that did not come as naturally. This is so ridiculous to me now, as I was so wrong and focused on myself. While listening to Tim Keller, it was so obvious. It has nothing to do with personality types or temperament. The appearance of the fruit of the Spirit in a believer's life is a supernatural event. It comes with being a child of God. It's the result of Christian change. Absolutely true. Here's another that, again, just mimics so many others. This person says, I'm extremely prideful. I'm an extremely prideful human being. In my humbleness, I'm actually prideful. I evade compliments while really hoping it will just fuel more praise because all I really desire is that human affirmation, ignoring the glory that God deserves. In my kindness, I am prideful because all I really want is that person I'm being kind to think well of me. Right? And if you can't say yes to that, you just don't know your own heart very well. Many times, even in my supposed faithfulness, I am prideful. Sometimes as I sit and open the Word, I hope someone will walk back and note what a good and faithful servant I am. And this is, if you like this discussion, just wait for Romans, because when we get to Romans, we're beyond all of the background and the Gentileness, and it's really into delving into the Christian life. And you're going to see this so much, and what's so tragic is when Paul talks about the law, he talks about something that was intended to be so good becomes an instrument for evil because of our sinfulness. And the same thing is true here. I'm trying to be a good and faithful servant, and yet it's my pride that gets in the way and messes up what was a good motive. There are days that my stomach twists with the anxiety of the unknown, and all because I think I know what I need. I confuse what I desire with what I need. I've known these things about myself for a long time. In fact, a listing off of the fruit of the Spirit in my head makes me cringe. How will I ever be enough? How will I truly exhibit that I am a Spirit-filled person when I can't even properly and truthfully display His fruit? Yet this is where God's grace displays its power, and there is hope. And I certainly want to sound that message. There is great hope, and we're going to talk about that in a moment here, okay? Similar things, just in different ways, different words. The one thing that hit me hardest was the one about self-control and how self-control can sometimes be fueled by pride. I think that I do at times seem to have more self-control than others, but what is fueling that self-control? Is it a desire to make myself look better to God, or man, or is it the practical outworking of my joyful desire for the Lord? I fear that it is often the previous of those two options. I've been relying on fake fruits of the Spirit. In the last year, I've had some trials. Family and friends have been praising my spiritual strength and peace during this time. But I've realized that the peace I've been showing has been rooted in pride. I've hidden my emotions and problems because I don't want others to know how much I've been struggling. I've realized that these sins are much deeper than I realized, so I really need to begin dealing with them. Toward the end of the section, we listened to Keller, and he hit a bit on cynicism, and I was cut to the heart. I've known for a while now that cynicism and negativity are things that I really struggle with. It's pretty easy to get away with, too, because I have the ability to keep myself from expressing it outwardly. But on the inside, I usually think the worst about people and situations. I am judgmental, self-righteous, and proud, and only a few people can know or tell. I understand now that I am ensnared in this kind of mental negativity, that I will be hindered in bearing fruit and showing the love of Christ to others. I feel more convicted than ever to repent from this sin and to seek the Lord, as well as seeking counsel from others and confessing my sin. And I think if there's any kind of benefit from the repentance that I think a lot of us felt, it's this. It's almost like, with these 9 different pieces of the fruit, that if you have to pick 1 or 2 up at a time and juggle them, you can do it. Right? Because you can kind of work your way through around it. But then, like Keller says, when you try to juggle all of them at once, all of a sudden, they just all fall away and you say, can't fake it, can't do it. And that's a good thing. To realize that the righteousness which Christ is calling us to is so much higher than what you've been satisfied with in the past. I think if you've come to this realization, you're probably a lot farther ahead than I was when I was in college. Because it probably wasn't until around 1998 when one of my best friends gave me a book by by Dallas Willard called Divine Conspiracy, where I had the same kind of eye-opening experience. And in 1998, you were little, but I was a lot older than you are now. Okay? And it finally came, as we worked through the Sermon on the Mount, it just came to that realization of the inner heart righteousness that Jesus was really asking for, and that was good, and that I wanted. And I realized, you just kind of get caught up in church life, and you put on the good facade, and you try to work on these things, and really what you're working on is just putting a better show on, And so, there really is repentance that takes place where you say, okay, God, I really can't do this. I really want what this is, and I don't know how to get it. Now, here's the problem. The problem is, what we often do, and what a couple of you did do, was you said, man, I really need to work harder at this. And just realize after we've read this and how widespread this is, that if your inclination is to work harder, you're not quite to the repentance where you need to be, because you've got to just totally give up and say, there's nothing I can do to make this whole thing work. Right? There is nothing you can do. I mean, there is something, but it's not what you think it is, probably. Okay. Someone writes a really good paper, and they say, by praying for individual parts of this, I've missed the point of how the Spirit is working in me. From what I've seen and understand, it's better to pray that I be more filled with the Spirit since the fruits are interconnected. And that's true. Prayer is certainly a part of it. But how do we get there? And I think the answer is again, totally given up the traditional ways we've done it. Let me just read one more here. If I'm not self-controlled, it means I'm not loving, patient, peaceful, and gentle, kind, and good, or faithful either. And it sucks that there's nothing I can do about it. The Spirit of God produces this fruit, not me. Any love that I have is not mine, it's from God. Any peace that I have, it's not mine, it's from God. Any faith I have, it's not mine, it's from God. Just as with salvation, it's all God's doing. I shouldn't trust God with reviving me from the dead, spiritually speaking, and then expect that I have the power to make me better afterwards. Right? Excellent point. So here we get to how are we going to deal with this, and the next couple deal with this. One confusing thing for me in this passage was the idea of how do we live out the fruits of the Spirit or fruit of the Spirit, if we are constantly failing at them. What I mean by this is it seems depressing knowing that if we don't have one fruit, then we aren't living any of them. It just seems depressing, and it should, except that there's an answer that we're going to get to, okay? And so, let me just read you one more that just really captures this thing so well. He says this, "Throughout this sermon, there were daggers going into my heart. I thought I knew what this meant. So many messages and lessons have been taught on this. However, every time I've taken and misused this, I walked away from these messages saying I need to work on this specific aspect of my life. I thought I was a joyful, peaceful man of God, and in reality, I'm filled with pride. I filled my life with the lie that I was living a good Christian life. In reality, I do not have any of the fruit because they are one. You cannot have one without the other, and they depend on each other. Looking at how I have misused the passage challenges me to deeply look at how things in my life need to change. My walk has been so far away from Christ when I thought I was so close. I've selfishly sought after peace, joy, and love, thinking that I could somehow attain these things apart from God." This is just almost Romans 6 and 7 written out in our language. This is just perfect. "My life needs to change from a sinful pursuit to a Christ-filled pursuit. I must cut out the desire for praise, glory, which I have filled in place of Christ. I must have a newfound love that I cannot get enough of. I need to have the love for Christ like a high school teen has for their crush. I must fill my life with Christ and trust God to grow the fruits of the Spirit in me. This is a painful message to listen to because it cut through all the lies that I'd filled my head with and focused on the core issues that are wrong in my life." So, what do we do here then? And I think the answer is to go back here to the passage in Galatians chapter 5. And a number of people actually listened to Keller's sermon again, and a few people actually went on and listened to the end of it. And that's great if you wanted to do that. Let me tell you a little bit about what he says at the end of it. Right? And what he's saying is this, that in verses 16 and 17 and 18, there are some really important clues here. And the biggest clues are these. When he says in verse 16, "I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh." Now, I think that's, I guess we've got Net Bible up here, and I think most of us are used to the King James, or maybe it's NIV or NASB too, that say lusts of the flesh, right? You guys have Bibles open, or do you know, where does that phrase come from? Is that NIV or NASB too? Do they say lusts of the flesh? Who's got one? Anybody got a Bible? In our Bible class. Is that the Holman Bible? Oh, that's a different translation. Let's see what that says too. What do you got? Desires in what? New American Standard? ESV, desires? Oh, okay. So I guess the lust of the flesh is just an old King James. And what? And New King James. Okay. Desires. Okay. All right. Well, desire is a pretty common word here, but when we see that word lust, we're all familiar with the King James language there, right? You won't carry out the lusts of the flesh or desires of the flesh. For the flesh has desires that are opposed to the Spirit, and the Spirit has desires. Same word. The Spirit has lusts. Okay? Things for which the Spirit deeply lusts over and desires. Now, putting Spirit and lust in the same sentence sounds strange to us, but Keller wants to kind of reinforce that point, and so he kind of makes fun of it a little bit. And he says, okay, here's not a joke for you, but you can go away and say the Spirit lusts, and talk about that for a second. And so then he brings up the question, what does the Spirit lust after? And it's an excellent question. What is it the Spirit desires so much? And he doesn't talk about it here so much because in some ways he's already talked about it, and also because it's a really big theological focus all throughout the New Testament that we should know about. Okay? In fact, somebody got a pen or pencil I can use? Randy, you got something there? Oh, cool. Can I use the red one? Let me have the red one. That's cool. All right? Let me show you like this. Now we got the camera and no light. There we go. There's the light. Can you see it? That's not good. We don't want the light from below. We want the light from above. I wasn't trying to be theological about that. There we go. Zoom out here a little bit. Okay. Now, what's going on here is if we've got from Genesis to Revelation over here, right, beginning to end, for most of the Bible, for most of the Old Testament, all we know about is God. Right? And then, of course, we find out about the second person. And Jesus comes along, and obviously here's the midpoint where Jesus comes. But if you're talking about actually the Bible itself, that covers the Gospels, which really cover about that much of the New Testament. Most of the New Testament's there. And then in the book of Acts, we really find out about the Spirit. Right? And the Spirit kind of doesn't dominate things, but you certainly find out about the Spirit in the rest of the New Testament. Did you ever wonder why God shows it to us in that order? Why is it that the Spirit doesn't show up? I mean, I know we can find the Spirit back in here and hovering over the face of the waters and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of the focus and the person of the Spirit in Acts 2 and in Acts 10, why is it that doesn't show up until here? Look at the order. What does the Spirit lust after? What does the Spirit want to do? What does the Spirit want to magnify? All focused on that. Always, always, always focused on that, right? What the Spirit is desiring to do is to make much of Jesus, and this is where Keller goes back and to Galatians chapter 5, and he says, "Do you know what the Spirit lusts after? The Spirit lusts after Jesus, desires Jesus." Now that it sounds kind of salacious or kind of silly, but it's true. The Spirit really, really desires to magnify and to show up Jesus and to have us do that in our lives. And he even goes so far as to use this kind of very human illustration, as Paul would say it. And he'd say, okay, if the Holy Spirit had a bedroom, guess what kind of posters he would have up on the wall? He would have Jesus posters up on the wall, right? And I just kind of like that because it's so real. It's like, okay, that's the stuff you focus on. That's kind of your hero and all that sort of thing, okay? So that the Spirit has these desires, and the Spirit's desires are going to overcome the flesh's desires, and the Spirit is desiring Jesus. So what he's leading us to here is that the Spirit wants you and me not to try to focus on the fruit. The Spirit's going to grow that fruit when we focus on Jesus. Now, up to this point, it's still a very abstract argument that doesn't tell you what to do. I know that, okay? Because in this very last, oh my goodness, what did I do with it? Oh, I did put it over right here. In this very last reflection from you, someone says this: is it normal for Christians seeking Jesus to struggle to let the Spirit grow His fruit in them? And I would say, yeah, it's very normal, but it's not necessary. Does simply reading the Bible and praying, what many people would say seeking Jesus looks like, allow the Spirit to grow His fruit? Did you catch that? And I would say, yeah, that's a good start. But don't leave it at reading the Bible and praying, because that's too vague for what Paul's going after here, okay? How do I seek Jesus with all that I am still enjoying, with all that I am, and still enjoy friendship, laughter, movies, running, books, schoolwork, etc.? How must Christians balance all of this while trying to love Jesus most? And here's where I'm going to try to offer you my solution to this, okay? And I think it's good. A couple of years ago in 2013 at Grace, we did a summer series on the fruit of the Spirit. And Pastor Craig preached a bunch of those sermons. A couple other people preached some, and he asked me to preach two. I did one on joy at the beginning, and then I did the one at the very end after we'd covered every aspect and said, okay, how do we put this into practice? And I just felt this real burden from the Lord to serve my congregation well and to make this much more than just cliches. And I began to think about this. How do we put Jesus posters up in our room, at least mentally? How do we get the Spirit to focus on Jesus? What are we going to do? And especially this last question, how do I integrate him into my life, right? And the metaphor that I came up with that I want to share with you today is this. I want to invite Jesus into the conversations. And what I mean by that is this. When you're assessing your life like you did with all of these things, right? And you see the situation in your life and you say, oh man, I was just trying to be faithful, but I realized it was because I wanted someone to look at me. At that point right there, what I want us to do, and what I've tried to do and what I've found to be the most beneficial in my life, is to invite Jesus in the conversation. And what I mean by that is this. You take the four Gospels as you have learned about Jesus. And you don't just read through the stories, but you take those stories to imaginatively fill in what Jesus is like. And let him sit down next to you and talk sense into you and counsel you about the situation. So if I sense this sin in my life, what does Jesus want to say to me now? And you sit back and you start to think through his life. Did Jesus face a situation like this? Now, your first response might be, well, no, Jesus never faced this situation of lust or this situation of a girlfriend problem even if I'm a girlfriend of my girlfriend's. He never faced that kind of stuff. But then you begin to realize, look, Hebrews says he has been in all ways tempted as we are. So there is something he went through that was very, very similar to anything that we go through. And what you have to do in your mind is say, how would Jesus deal with this? What would he say to me? And think it through and cultivate the life of Jesus into your imagination and let him speak that truth into your life. Now, here is the thing. This is so much different than just opening up my Bible and reading and praying. It's actually inviting Christ into and getting the mind of Christ thinking about the very situations in which we live and go to the movies and spend time with our friends or have these issues and we see the sin come up. You say, let Jesus speak into that. How would he feel about that? And you start thinking about Jesus and focusing on Jesus. And my friends, that is the point where the Spirit gets so excited he can't help himself and starts to grow the character of Jesus in us. Now, I don't know if that still sounds abstract or not. What I want to do here is play you just a 10 or 12 minutes of the final part of that message I preached, because I give 3 illustrations that maybe will help make this real for you, okay? So I hope this works. This is in August of 2013. And I just want to go for about 12 minutes here. And I'm going to actually show you a little chart that looks like this. And I think I can do it even after I click off here. Let's try it.
Okay. You and I have decisions to make. We're coming up from the bottom of the chart. Forgive my chart. It's just the way my mind thinks. And I think that little diamond is supposed to be a decision. For those of you who make these kind of charts and like them, I think that's what it is. If it's not, don't tell me till later. But that represents a decision point, okay? That represents me or you in a daily decision, in a crisis point where I have a choice to make. I can either go one way or the other. I see that I need the character of Christ in my life, and I can either go to the left or to the right. If I go to the right, it's where I have considered Jesus. I have taken into account what he wants for me and how he has lived his life, and I follow that out. If I go the other way, if I go the left way to the works, Steve, take us up there if you would. To the right, I end up with these works. If I go to the left, I end up with certain works. Both of these are works. The trouble is that on the left-hand side, if there is a blank in that spot and there's no Jesus there and I haven't consciously considered him, chances are I end up with what we have over there, the works of the flesh. Well, I try to do good things. I haven't tried to do bad things. No, you haven't, but you've left Jesus out of the equation. And what else do you expect? What else can you expect? But if I put Jesus in this equation, I trust that the Spirit of God will enable me then to have the kind of works which Paul calls in Ephesians 2:10 good works, or which we have called here in Galatians 5 the fruit of the Spirit. All right? Does this make sense? So we developed this pattern where we see the need, we consider what Jesus would do, and we trust the Spirit to allow us to do that. Let me give you some examples. Let me flesh this out. And here are 3 examples that may or may not speak to you, but which I trust will give us a sense of what this looks like on the ground. And let's just say you or I have a problem with lust. You can lust after a lot of things. You can lust after things and shiny things, or you can lust after power. You can lust after a reputation. You can lust after all sorts of things. But the trouble is, you come to church at Grace during the summer, and you hear this message on the fruit of the Spirit, and you say, oh man, I really need to have self-control. I need to have more self-control. I know I do. And so what do? Well, you can white knuckle it, and you say, I got to try harder. I just got to try harder next time. Or you can try something else. You can invite Jesus into the conversation. And you say, I don't know if I can invite Jesus into that conversation. I don't think that's a problem that he ever actually had. But you could invite him into the conversation and say, Jesus, well, what do you think about this? There's an event in your life. Have you ever had this trouble? And Jesus would say to us, oh yeah, absolutely. I really struggled with this one a couple times. In fact, there was one time I was really hungry. I think I hadn't eaten for like 40 days. You ever done that? Have you ever not eaten for 40 days? No. I haven't ever not eaten for 40 days. And he would say, well, trust me, if you haven't eaten for 40 days, you get really hungry. Well, what did you do? Well, the thing is, I had it right there in front of me. I had the thing which would have satisfied that hunger right there in front of me, and I could have reached out and taken it. I could have done it. The thing that would have really satisfied your appetite? Yes, it was right there. What did you do? I didn't do it. Why not? Well, I realized that if I had done that, if I had reached out and taken that thing, I knew that even though it was a good thing, that it wasn't the way God wanted me to do it. And I knew if I'd done that, it would have hurt other people, and so I chose not to. I said no. But you know what the good news is? That I eventually got what I wanted. See, and the other thing is that temptation, it passed. You sometimes feel like in the middle of the temptation that it's so overwhelming that you just have to say, give into it and do it, but it's not true. If you say no to it, the temptation flees. It passes. Oh, it comes back from time to time, but every time you say no to that kind of thing, because you know God wants to fulfill your desires in a good way, in a right way, at the right time, that temptation loses power. And I've invited him into the conversation. I've considered his ways. I've thought about him. And if the Spirit of God says to you, yes, that's what I want, the power of God becomes operative in your life, making you willing and able to follow the pattern and to say no, and the self-control starts to grow. Or let's say this. Let's say, example number 2. Someone has stolen from you. Someone has taken what is yours. No, maybe not exactly something tangible like that, but someone has come and maybe it's a white-collar thing where they took your reputation or they stole your dignity or they just didn't treat you right. Or maybe they didn't treat a friend of yours right. It really makes you mad. It really starts to tear you up inside. It really starts to bother you because you just say to yourself, I am so right and they are so wrong. And the justification just mounts. And all of a sudden you don't realize how angry you are because you're so justified. You're so right. And you think about that kind of thing and you say, well, I went to church at Grace this summer and they told me I really had to be loving. And I don't know what I'm going to do about it, but I guess I just got to be more loving. I guess I got to work harder. I guess I'd try harder to be more loving. Or you could invite Jesus into the conversation. And you could say to him, anybody ever steal anything from you or take stuff that was yours? And he would answer. He'd say, yeah, people took my clothes one time. And they also took my life. Same day. Pretty bad day. Anybody ever take your life? Well, no, it's never really gotten quite that bad. Jesus says, it's okay, I know how you feel. What did you do? Well, I started thinking about it. And after a while, I started getting really sorry for them. I just felt bad for them. I thought, these people don't even know what they're doing. And I just started to pity them, and so, I asked my Father to forgive them. Well, did that help? Well, it depends on what you mean by help. Sure didn't ease the pain, still hurt really bad. But I think it made my dad happy. And you know what? That passed too. Temptation passed too. I got my clothes back and my life, about 3 days later. And it worked out. Or maybe, example number 3, maybe you're that guy who after years of marriage is thinking about leaving his wife. The kids are raised, the expectations are lowered, life's gotten complicated, it's too difficult to unravel, the spark is gone, and you say, I'm tired of faking it, I just want to be happy. But then you come to grace in the summertime. And you learn about faithfulness. You have to be faithful. So you say, I know that's what I should do. I'm going to try to be, I'm going to be more faithful. Or you could invite Jesus into the conversation. You say, well, it's kind of silly. How do you invite Jesus into that conversation? Jesus was never married. But you do. And Jesus says, yeah, it's true. Never was married, but have had an unfaithful bride. I've had an unfaithful bride, and I understand what this feels like. And truth is, I've been to a lot of weddings. I actually really like weddings. I went to a wedding one time, and they were not celebrating the right way, and I made it better. I like weddings. In fact, I was at your wedding. And I witnessed your vows, and they were good vows. Really liked them. Those were good vows. Because if there's anything I'm known for, it's, in fact, the name I took for myself in the Old Testament was the God who keeps His promises. It's really, really important to keep your promises. For over 1,500 years in the Old Testament, most people didn't think God would keep His promises, but I made the choice to come down to earth in order to keep the promises of God. And this is why Paul says in 2 Corinthians that in Christ all the promises of God are yes. I really like keeping promises. In fact, I always keep my promises even to people who are not worthy, and frankly, you're one of them. And you might think about returning the favor. See, what we're doing here is we're simply following the pattern from Philippians. We're taking a look at where we need the character of God in our lives. We're ruminating. We're looking at the life of Jesus. What has He done? What would He do? What would He say? And to the degree that you let that image come into your heart and soul, the Spirit of God will take it and use it and grow the character of Jesus by making you willing and able to do whatever you need to do. So let me describe it, let me finish it like this and say this. Again, that the grace-driven effort, the thing which distinguishes it from works, grace-driven effort is both from God and is clearly focused on Him. What I'm about to say next would probably sound like a cliche, except for what we've said today. I hope it makes sense to you. What this means then is we don't need to focus on becoming a loving, joyous, peaceful person. What you focus on is Jesus, and the Spirit grows His fruit in your life. Now, those are not just pious words.
So there you got the kind of the big idea here. I hope that gives some tangible way to go about this. And I feel confident that this is a pretty smart thing to do, because really what we've just done here is just mimic what Paul tells us to do elsewhere. And the kind of the pattern I had in my mind when I was doing this was I went to Philippians chapter 2. And if I say Philippians chapter 2 to you, I hope you remember all the exalted story about Jesus, right? This one who was God, didn't think it was robbery to be equal with God, but made himself a no reputation, all that sort of stuff. But what Paul says before that is really, really important, because he says, you guys are not getting along. You have selfish attitudes. And so he identifies the problem in their lives, and then he says, okay, let's bring Jesus into the conversation. Now, let's just take an example out of his life. He wasn't worried about himself. He wasn't worried about selfish ambition. In fact, he gave his whole life up for everybody else, and he came down here and did this, right? Therefore, do all things without murmuring and complaining. So I'm not really, I mean, maybe I'm putting new words to it, but I'm really just doing what Paul has already given us this pattern for. So it is far more than just, I need to read my Bible more or pray more. I need to actually utilize my Bible to imagine the story of Jesus and the life of Jesus and put him front and center right into this issue or conversation. And that, I think, is what the Spirit is lusting and desiring after, okay? So when I talked about that idea of grace-driven effort, I was talking about the idea of there's a lot of work to it, and the work is bringing Christ into the conversation, and then there's definitely something you can do. You don't just pray, oh, God, make me a better person, or God, fill me with the Spirit, right? You start focusing on Jesus, and the Spirit just comes in, all right? Comments about that? Does that make sense? Or you want to follow up, or are you good, or you want to say anything? Yeah, Daniel? Yeah. I mean, it all depends on what you're angry about, right? If you're angry about something that offends you, that's very different than being angry about something that's hurting the mission of God, right? And that's what's going on at the money changers. And those people deserved it. They were hardened people who needed that kind of approach. But the woman who is caught in adultery is not that kind of hardened criminal. She's in a lot of ways a victim, and Jesus is very sweet to her. So it's giving what's appropriate to that situation. And as we look through Galatians, Paul is very loving and gentle sometimes, and sometimes he's pretty harsh, depending upon who it is, I guess. Yeah. It just takes a little bit of imagination, right? It just takes thinking through Jesus. It just takes taking those Gospels, putting them in your mental blender, and imagining them and bringing them into your own life and applying it there. That's the work that most people don't do. But that's the most important part of cultivating the Spirit's work in your life, I think you can do. And the more we do that, the more we begin thinking about Jesus and thinking about him being with us, right? And it's not just reading the stories over 1,500 times. It's putting those stories into my story and thinking, what would he say to me with this issue? And I guarantee you, if you start thinking about that, you will come up with answers. You will hear him speak to you. I think in a lot of ways it got it right, but it isn't just what would he do, because that kind of focused on our outward actions, And again, then that kind of allows us a chance to, okay, Jesus would do this, so I'll do it, and people think I'm cool too. I really want us to first of all think, what would Jesus think? How would he think through this issue? That's what I was trying to do in those illustrations. What was Jesus thinking on the cross? He wasn't angry at them. He felt sorry for them and started praying for them, right? And so when you start developing those kind of attitudes about the situation, then you will do the right thing because you've thought through the mind of Christ first. My guess anyway. Nancy? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. What if a person is a new believer, not familiar with the story of Jesus? How do you help them? And the answer is, what would you say?
What is the latest story you learned about
Get to know the story of Jesus as fast as you can. Yeah, right. You get to know the story of Jesus as fast as you can. Somebody else asked a question that was similar to that. I thought where you were going, but that was, how do you deal with Keller? He talked about it being gradual and inevitable. And it is true, it does take time for these things to develop. It does take time. But if you're not cultivating the Spirit, it isn't going to develop, apart from that. You can accelerate the growth. So it is true, it does take time, and you shouldn't expect to have this overnight, but there are certain things you can do to make that growth better, like the gardener does. Parker, do you want to say something?
It was along the line of that, more of like the genuineness of that. So genuine compassion or genuine like thinking the best rather than cynicism. That's more of a gradual thing, telling yourself to do that.
I think so, but I think the more that you think through what is Jesus going to do here, what is his attitude going to be, what's he going to think about here, the more you do that.
Even when it feels forced at some point.
Well, I don't know. Maybe the thing is, as I was thinking through those illustrations in my head, the more you get into the mind of Christ and you see the big picture, it almost becomes hard not to fall into it. And you do see, wow, in eternity, all of these foolish, immediate temptations are going to fall by the wayside. And Jesus was able to see past that, and I really do think that's the most important thing you can do to get the mind of Christ. Yeah. All right? Okay. Let's leave that there then and see if we can finish up a little bit of Galatians 5 and make sure we understood what's going on here with this statement, you are not under the law. Okay? Because I think that's the last thing we never got to. Now remember, don't just rip this out of context like an irresponsible teenager or an irresponsible person who wants to justify whatever they're going to do. Oh, if I have the Spirit, I don't have to follow any rules. Well, no, that's not quite true, okay? We're talking about someone here who is Spirit-controlled, who is following the Christ. If you are led by the Spirit, you truly are, you are not under the law. So I think I got a couple of questions to follow up on it here. Yeah, like this. So using the analogy of the 55-mile-an-hour sign as the law and you as the driver, how does the Spirit change things? You are not under the law. Does the Spirit take away the sign and allow you to drive any speed you want? Is that what the Spirit's going to do? And I would think that the answer is, hopefully by now, no, that's not it at all, right? I would hope you'd go here. The Spirit causes you to see the goodness in the law and want to follow it from a changed heart. So that when he says here, if you are led by the Spirit, you're not under the law, what he's actually saying is this, you're not under the law's condemnation. Not that you're free to ignore it or violate it. Okay? He's not trying to say you're free from the law so you don't have to do it anymore. If I'm out there driving and I'm saying, okay, I'm led by the Spirit, I can go 80 if I want, Paul would say, no, you don't get it at all. If you're led by the Spirit, we can trust you to do the right thing and the good thing. Right? Assuming the 55 is the good thing, and it generally is. Okay. So to put it in another statement, if the Spirit is leading you, you will internalize the moral requirements of the law and keep, not violate them. So again, when we go in here, you're not condemned by the law because you've already internalized it and you really are loving people. Which means you might rebuke them publicly because you love them so much. You're not just trying to get them to affirm you and think of you as a nice person. So you might say things like, you're a brood of vipers and snakes. Or you might say, oh, I wish they would cut themselves off. because that's what real love does. It sees what the needs are in the lives of the other people, and it says it no matter what you think of that person. Okay? If you're led by the Spirit, you'll not be under the law's penalty. That's another way to say it. So I don't know if I put this up here. The law's penalty. Thou shalt not murder. Am I under that law? Well, I'm under the jurisdiction of the law, but I'm not under the penalty of the law because I haven't murdered anybody. Okay? And when he says you're not under the law, he means you're not under the penalty of it because you haven't violated it. You've kept it. Right? So the goal is not to take away the law against coveting so that our coveting is no longer considered sin. This might be, if this doesn't connect with you, maybe this last paragraph will. I'm not going to try to take away the law of coveting so that my coveting is no longer considered sin, but to actually be so content in Jesus that we don't covet and we are not under the law's condemnation. All right? Now, I think that's the same thing. It's the same thing he says here in 5:18. It's the same thing that he's trying to get at here when he says, against such things there is no law. That is, if you're living this sort of a way, you're not going to break any laws. And all of this then goes back to Paul's original concern. If these Gentiles don't keep all of Torah, won't they just be moral reprobates? And Paul's answer is no, they have the Spirit. And if they are led by the Spirit, they're not going to break any of the significant laws that you Jewish people are worried about. Right, now I've done all the talking, and you haven't done any talking, but are you with me here? Questions or agreement? Joe? Sure? All right. Parker? Because in this book, he is speaking fast, and he assumes that I think that they're following the conversation. If you were to get involved in a deep conversation and you were to record it, someone who looked at it 2 months later might not be able to understand every phrase, but in the context of what we're talking about, you would get it. Right? So in the context of this whole book about are these Gentiles going to be reprobates, or are they, what are we going to do about them if they don't keep this? I think it does make sense. Because again, the goal of being led by the Spirit is not so I can break all the laws, so I can in fact do them. All right. So where do we go next? Oh, I guess we're done. Are we done with chapter 5 then? The questions there? Okay. All right. Well, let's get on to this then. I don't think there's too much to slow us down here. Brothers and sisters, if a person is discovered in some sin, you who are spiritual restore such a person. Now, remember last time when we talked about, see if I can remember the verses. I think it was 5, 7 to 11, and Paul's tirade. You remember that discussion? You remember what that reflected? 5, 7 to 11, sort of a tirade, and it kind of had a corresponding part earlier in the book. Remember that? Yeah, with 1, 6 to 11, I believe it was, okay? So that whole thing kind of wrapped up all of his argument. And so he's kind of assumed here then that you've bought the argument, that you're with him, and now he's trying to really do pastoral work. So if we're all on the same page theologically now in Galatia, then we get here to chapter 6, and he says, brothers and sisters, if a person is discovered in some sin. Now, I think I asked you, this is good advice for any sin, but given the context, I wonder if Paul has a particular sin in mind. What particularly does he now not want the Galatians to be doing anymore? Any guesses or answers to that? Ryan?
I mean, in the verse previous, he says, let us not be conceited, provoking each other. He says, if someone's caught in sin, you should restore that person.
Yeah. Don't be provoke each other. If somebody's caught in a sin, I think that's generally true. But especially in this context, I would say it's like this. Perhaps we've been at odds with each other, but if each side will accept that Paul is right, let's forgive one another and move on. I think he's trying to heal the tensions that have been there. Because there surely have been some people who said, no, let's follow Paul. No, let's follow these new teachers. Oh, they should be circumcised. No, they shouldn't be circumcised, right? And so in this big blow-up, I think Paul is saying, okay, guys, if you've been involved in this sin, you who are spiritual, restore such a person in a spirit of gentleness, right? Let's get the body back together and working together again. Carry one another's burdens because you are still your brother's keeper. You're still on the same team. Right? In this way, fulfill the law of Christ. Now, what is the law of Christ? Be careful not to give any quick, non-thoughtful answers, maybe even a range of possible answers. Anybody want to give a shot at the law of Christ? Yeah, Rachel? Yeah, that's a good, safe place to go. That's for sure. Jesus was all about love Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, for sure, and love your neighbors yourself, and that really reflects a lot of what we've talked about. That's good. That's a good answer. Yeah, same kind of context too. Okay, so somebody give me a wrong answer. What is the law of Christ not? Oh, yeah, for sure. It would not be circumcision. That's true. Usually, when people talk about the law of Christ, they think it means the New Testament, as opposed to the law of Moses, which is Old Testament. Why is Paul not talking about the New Testament when he says the law of Christ? Because why? They didn't have it yet, right? This is the first book. It was non-existent, okay? Yeah, so I'll say it something like this. Seems to be an obvious contrast to the law of Moses, but why? Well, because the law of Moses is no longer valid? No, not necessarily. Or because only half the congregation is obligated to it, right? So you think of it this way, the Jews might be under the law of Moses. Where are the Gentiles under? Well, at least the law of Christ, right? Everybody's under the law of Messiah. So I would probably... The context has to do with caring for others, as you guys have said. I would say the law is somewhat changed by Christ, maybe like Gentiles being first-class citizens, or more importantly, the law as explained and lived out by Christ in, for example, like the Sermon on the Mount, the true spirit of the law. Let's be under the law which Messiah taught. Right? So you're thinking Sermon on the Mount kind of things here. The moral laws of God that are grounded in the character of God that never change, like loving and joying and peacing, honesty, character, and morality that all believers of all time want to follow. So he's not just trying to say, now you're under the New Testament, not the Old, but he's trying to say, this is how Messiah lived it out. Right? Again, keeping the focus on Messiah. Ryan, do you want to say something? You just stretch him. Okay. Now, number 3. I know it may be difficult to conceive, so don't spend a lot of time, but having learned all you have about the book in Galatia, imagine how the readers might have heard these verses. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each one examine his own work, then he can take pride in himself, not compare himself with someone else. Put yourself back in Galatia. To what situation might those things refer? Any ideas on this one? Yes, exactly, right? If you're a Jew, you might think that you're better than the Gentile is. Something like that. Or just imagine these practical situations, right? You get a feeling Paul's concerned about them understandably comparing themselves. She smells like bacon. I mean, just think about it. You come together for dinner. He rotates his chariot wheels on the Sabbath, right? What's wrong with that guy? He thinks he's so cool, carrying around that big black Torah scroll all the time, and all I have is this weeny little book of Galatians. So there's all kinds of ways which these Jews and Gentiles would be comparing themselves with each other and having a natural tendency to feel better than someone else. So Paul says, okay, let's be happy with each other. If someone was out of line, if you really think you're a spiritual person, restore them gently in a spirit of gentleness and love each other. And don't think you're better than each other, right? Because everybody will carry his own load. I think that's probably what's going on here. Now, 6 to 10, I didn't ask you questions about this, but it basically says take care financially of your teachers, probably. You don't have, you have already done that. No worries. Your tuition more than pays your teacher's salary, okay? But in this situation, the one who receives instruction must share all good things with the one who teaches it. And all of this, when he says all good things and doing good, he's probably talking about your money and how you invest it. We sometimes take verses 7 out of context because they can be applied broadly. But in this, a person will reap what he sows. The way you use your money, you will harvest the results of it. Invest your money in spiritual ends. So then, whenever we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. And I think it's it probably has general meaning, but particularly in this culture of be generous, right? Do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of faith. You see a little bit of a priority there? It's an interesting priority, isn't it? Do good to all people, especially those of the household of faith. So, if you're at a restaurant and you're going to tip the waitress, how much do you tip? No, wait. Have we prayed before dinner or not? If we've prayed before dinner, how much should you tip the waitress? You better be pretty generous, don't you think? You better be. Because the waiters and waitresses I've talked to don't like to do their stuff on Sunday because the church crowd is the stingiest. That's a really ugly testimony, isn't it? You got to be doing good to all people. But what if you find out your waitress is a Christian? Oh, well, if they're a Christian, they don't need it, or they'll understand. No. There's a certain priority here. Let us do good to all people, but especially take care of your family. Okay? All right. Let's go on to 6:11. 6:11. See with what big letters I make as I write to you with my own hands. Can you think of two possibilities what the large letter thing might refer to? Anybody come up with one? Seth? Paul was writing himself so they wouldn't think he was a fake. Okay, maybe, although I don't think they would have recognized his handwriting. But maybe. Obviously, they might not think he was a fake, but at least he's saying, I'm personally involved in this, right? So take this personally from me. Yeah.
Kind of bouncing off that one idea I heard is, we mentioned Paul's eyesight possibly earlier. And maybe he dictated the rest of the letter to the scribe or wrote this portion himself so he had to write down the words or be able to see it.
Yeah, it might have to do with his bad eyesight, right? And they would probably recognize that. Another would be that when paper is at a premium, and papyrus is here, or vellum is very expensive, you write. Have you ever seen pictures of original manuscripts? There's no space between the letters. It's really, really kind of weird when you first try to look at it, because there's no space between the letters. Why? Well, because it was expensive. Space was expensive, so all the letters run right together, no punctuation, and if you wanted to emphasize something, you could write in large letters, but that was expensive. And so in some sense, Paul might be saying here, this is so important, I'm writing in large letters, like all caps, right? I'm shouting at you. So I would say like this, either emphasis of a personal nature of it or bad eyes, surely the former, maybe the latter, right? Now, this one's pretty important. If you get this, you will totally make my day. In what specific way would the Judaizers not obey the law? Let's get down there to it. For those who are circumcised do not obey the law themselves, but they want you to be circumcised so they can boast about your flesh. Now, in verse 13, we're talking about those opponents. When he says they do not obey the law, tell me, what does Paul mean by that? In what sense do they not obey the law? Yeah, that's a good one. I'll take that one. They're not truly loving, that's for sure. They're not truly loving.
If you ascribe to the law, you have to obey the whole law.
If you ascribe the law, you have to obey the whole law, meaning?
Meaning if circumcision if they're treating the law as salvific, then they have to keep the entire thing.
Okay, if they're treating the law as salvific, but that's true. But tell me how they don't obey the law. Oh, you're saying they're going to break some parts of it? Okay, that probably would be true too. Casey?
They're ignoring the new realities of what salvation is in favor of the old restrictions that separated the two.
Yeah, they're ignoring the new realities. Now, where do we get that from? 2:19, for through the law I died to the law. Remember what I keep saying that over and over again means? For through the law, what does Paul mean by that? I put it up on that screen like 6 times. Maybe the 7th will be the charm. For through the law, I died to the law. Through the law, what does it mean? What part of the law did he read that gave him his gospel? Come on, it's the verse I harp on all the stinking time. It's what I'm known for, kind of. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, right? In you will all the nations of the earth be blessed, right? In reading that, these people are not obeying Genesis 12:3. Because if they obeyed Genesis 12:3 and they knew Messiah had come, they wouldn't ask the Gentiles to get circumcised. So they're being disobedient to Genesis 12:3. Now, tell me why Paul's argument wouldn't have worked in 49 BC. Because Jesus hadn't come yet, right? But now that Jesus has come, Genesis 12:3 all of a sudden takes effect. And now it's disobedient to the law itself, as he has explained it in chapters 3 and 4. Right? So I think that's what he's bringing up. And that would have obviously made them really, really crazy, right? They're not listening to the laws found in Genesis 12:3. Do you understand how this would have set the Judaizers off? I mean, this would not have sit well with them. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. What? How dare you say we don't keep the law? Yeah, but they didn't. Okay. Paul does. Yep, you're the ones not really following Genesis, but I and the Galatians are. Booyah, Grandma. That's exactly what he just said to them. Okay. What's next? Question number 6 is not really a question. It's kind of just an outburst on my part. 6:16, the Israel of God. Now, and all who will behave in accordance to this rule, peace and mercy on them and on the Israel of God. Now, as you can see there, hope I'm not going too far. But most people would not see this as the church has now replaced Israel here. Most likely, it's a kind and gentle, loving shout-out to genuine Jewish believers. It's not used in this sense elsewhere. Nowhere else in the New Testament does it call the church the Israel of God. Okay, probably refers either to national Israel or believing Israel, and my guess is it's probably the bottom one there. And my guess is his point is simply this: as much as I've spoken against the law in rash terms to make Gentiles not want to be circumcised, truth is, I still love being Jewish and I still love Israel. And I kind of sense that that's where he's going with this. It's almost like, okay, when we get to the end here, and I've settled down and I'm calmed down and I've taken a deep breath. Okay, all right, and you know, the Jewish people are sitting in the back of the congregation, their heads bowed and kind of bloodied and beat up. He says, okay, let me just say this: I really love you, right? I still love you, so it's okay. Which leads us to verse 17. From now on, let no one cause me trouble, for I bear the marks of Jesus on my body. Now, did you catch what's so geniusly ironic about this? Explain this whole verse to me and his sentiment in verse 17. I mean, you read through, you got the section about Lystra, right, being stoned.
Wasn't he like basically arguing because they
stoned to death.
Yes, I think that's exactly what he's talking about. Did you guys hear what she said? This whole letter has been all about marks. You got to have the right marks. Circumcision, you have to have your body marked. And at the end, it's almost like Paul says, okay, I'm just done with this. You want to talk about marks? Let's talk about marks. Have you ever been stoned to death? Huh? Have you ever given your life for the gospel which you preach? And then, after your body was completely bruised and broken, and you maybe lost half your eyesight, you got up and went back into the town because you believed it so strongly? Have you ever done that? Show me the marks of persecution on your body, and then we'll talk. And I think that's exactly what he's getting at here. I bear the marks of Jesus on my body, and these are the true evidences that I believe firmly in my gospel. What evidences do you have about belief in yours? And so that's a really powerful and sarcastic way to finish and put these people in their place. Was there anything that we didn't cover about this last page that you wanted to? No? Cassie, you okay? You good? All right. All right. I think that officially almost puts us a day ahead, doesn't it? Parker? Yes?
The beginning of chapter 6.
Yeah.
The whole carry one another's burdens and then carry your own load. Can you
Talk about that? Yeah, sure. Notice the, what's that?
I was going to say, it kind of seems like within 3 sentences he's saying
Yeah, he does. He does, kind of. Notice, just observe for me the verb tenses involved. Tell me about the verb tenses. Yeah, it is. And the second one is, it's a future. It's a future. Carry each other's loads now, because someday in the future you will stand alone carrying your own load. What's he talking about? At the judgment seat, right? Yeah. Bear one another's burdens now, because there's going to come a day when you're going to stand on your own and give account for what you did. And you're going to carry your own load then, bud, and you better hope that you've been carrying other people's loads up to this point. Right? Yes. Yeah, the second one is definitely, verse 5 is definitely emphasizing the future, and I think it's probably the future judgment seat of Christ. Otherwise, I can't imagine what the future tense is about and why it says you're going to bear your own responsibility. It seems to fit to me. Yeah, Marcus? Who says that? NIV? Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody else have should carry his own load? Shall? Yeah, but shall is a way to say future. Yeah. Oh, will have to bear. Yeah, again, that puts more focus on the future, doesn't it? Yep. Okay.